So, hello everybody. Welcome back. This is the 8th stream and the last one. Woo! In this weekend of streams that we're doing here at Hiveworks under the hashtag #BeHome. So, a little reminder for everybody who is tuning in on Twitch. If you scroll down from the viewing window, we've got a bunch of really cool links you can check out. Mainly, we've got a store sale going on right now. Hashtag code Spring 2020. If you use it, you can get 10% off all our books and apparel and all of the cool stuff in our store. Super worth it. Discover some cool comics. As always, if you're discovering Hiveworks for the first time, we're an online publisher and just general studio, and all our comics are free to read online first, so you can discover a bunch of really fun comics if you don't know any of our comics yet. Check them out at hiveworkscomics.com. And 2 Kickstarters we got running currently for print versions of some of our comics. So we've got Alice in the Nightmare book 1 going, and we've got Among Us. Oh, I forgot to switch the image. This is how you can tell this is like my last stream because I'm a little loopy. There we go. So yes, I was saying, we've got Among Us book 1 that's also available on Kickstarter. Definitely check out both. Back one if you want to. It's always appreciated. So, the stream we're having right now, Worldbuilding NOPES. With me today to discuss this, we have Taylor Robin, who is the author of Never Satisfied. Very good comic that I enjoy. Well, I enjoy all the comics in this, so I'm just gonna blanket statement. Love all of these. Misha Krivanek, who is the author of Alice in the Nightmare, currently on Kickstarter. Diana Hugh, who is the author of Lonely Vincent. That is currently on hiatus, but will be coming back pretty soon. More awesome than ever. And finally, myself, Isabel Malosso, and my partner, Megan Levy-Heaton. We are the authors of Namesake, and I'm also your host, and have been your host for the past couple of panels. Get used to me, because I'm here forever, apparently. So the first thing to sort of bring up before we start getting into the nope section of this is, what is world building? Because that is kind of like a word that a lot of people throw around without necessarily defining it. But, there's a lot of stuff on Twitter that if you're writing a book or a comic, you have to world build so much. Like, if you don't world build, you suck or whatever. Putting a lot of pressure on this. World building is, at its core, just the process of constructing a fictional universe. There's no deep science to it. It's just building a world. And there's a lot of approaches to it. Some people make very detailed world that have a lot of layering. Some people, they go the Tolkien route, and they do everything from defining what cloth is like to full languages. And there has definitely been a trend lately towards pushing people to world build extremely intensely when they create works, because of the whole internet culture of overanalyzing everything. So world building and being extremely detailed and being able to answer all the questions perfectly, instead of just being able to go I never thought about it, or I just didn't focus on that part of the story, is being really pushed. So this idea that world building has to be extremely detailed, as opposed to just building the small universe around your character and the history of that world a little bit, has been pushed lately. So we're sort of going to talk in this environment of hyper backgrounding, what are things that people should avoid, and what's it like to write a story that's got more of a focus on the characters instead of the super intense background, or even building a background on Namesake from pre-existing works, and how that sort of does a shortcut towards world building. Because here, with Never Satisfied and Lonely Vincent, the worlds that are being built in those comics are extremely focused on the characters. For both of them, I don't even think we know the name of the country that the characters are in at all. It doesn't matter.
And you never will.
You never will. So, let's talk about that. Let's start by talking about your approach, your individual approach as all the people in this group to world building, and then we can talk about you know, what not to do. Eternal host. Yes, that's me. So who wants to start? Taylor, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll start as the anti-world building guy. I believe in doing basically as little as possible as you can get away with world building. Like I don't name the city. I don't name more than maybe 2 places in it. I explain as little as possible about how magic works. Like, because it's just chaff to me. It just gets in the way.
However, the characters are very intricate in the works you thing, and the works you do, and some people argue that like world building is just the world and not the characters, and character building is the character work. In your point of view, building the characters is way more important than building the world.
Absolutely, because they're who the story is about. I mean, I will say that I do enjoy stories that have world building. It's just not for me to make it myself because it's a lot more work. But I do enjoy, like, exploring those spaces.
Do you believe that character building and world building are completely different entities?
No, I think world building ideally is there to build the characters. Yeah.
How about you, Misha? How do you approach world building?
Well, for myself, I am one of those red string, I like to analyze everything. So, for myself, I like creating a list of like all different locations, not necessarily that my characters would ever go to, but if they do go somewhere, then that is for their character development and writing, like for the characters. But just for myself and people who are like me, I like having a little handy dandy guide, almost like a little tourist pamphlet. That's like, oh, there are all these like, there are some cool locations here. We might not see them because they're not part of the story, and I am not made of time or money, so I can't necessarily go to these places. But I ideally I like fleshing out my worlds for myself.
You kind of used the expression of like a visitor guide. So your type of world building is intense because you have a certain passion for like really layering it, but it's not necessarily technical like one would picture as sort of a Tolkien-esque world building, but it's more like casual enjoyment kind of thing.
Yeah, pretty much. Like if the if like you for me personally, if I get like too deep into like the history of the world or like what happened in 1892 or whatever, that just gets in the way of a lot of stuff. But just knowing like key dates that involve certain characters and just where the characters are and how they grow in relation to the world, that's something that I think about a lot. And for Alice specifically, in earlier versions, the wonder powers, they had a different name that didn't really relate to the world at all. And eventually I did realize that like, oh, these are people living in this world and have organically grown with this world. Why wouldn't they take like, terminology from the world itself, aka the wonder powers coming from the term Wonderland specifically, like finding ways that characters and the people in this world mesh together, because it really is all one big thing.
Sort of the opposite between like someone who's writing a book and they name like a location like jumble letters the long sands instead of just calling it like the long sands like a normal person would on location.
Yeah, pretty much.
How about you, Diana? What's your approach to building the world?
I don't know. I feel like I shouldn't be on this panel because I don't. I'm kind of in the same way. I take a big back seat to it because at the end of the day, I'm more focused the characters' experiences through the world, and for the most part, the characters of my comic they don't really care about what's going on in the world. But I hope to show that as time passes and as they grow into better people, that's how you see the world expand, and that's how you show it. Like instead of using world building to create kind of like this full fantasy. I'm not quite too concerned about that. I'm more concerned about using the world building to prop up what I'm trying to accomplish with like the characters' points of views and there's like general arcs throughout the story.
You're also
Welcome to the
professionally
resistance.
the resistance. You're also professionally a storyboard artist, so would you argue that you've been professionally sort of like inclined to do any kind of character building and world building in a more visual manner that sort of works with a comic medium instead of sitting people down and go like, here's the sitch, you know?
I mean, I think, yeah, like, I mean, I don't know. I kind of feel like I started off in comics first before I ever did storyboards. But, now that I've been in my career for a few years now, like, yeah, I definitely feel like I'm more focused on showing action instead of what I'm used to growing up with, which I love, by the way. I love the Tolkien stuff. I love, like, building being fed to like readers and to audiences in a way that makes you believe in this world that's beyond what the characters themselves see. But I guess in my own like vapid vain point of view, I just prefer to see what they're going through and then go from there.
I think that's pretty interesting. To sort of divert with me and Megan into like the kind of world building that we do in Namesake.
Which I love. It's so good.
I feel a lot of the world building in Namesake, though, uses a lot of shortcuts, which is something that I like to do because a lot of it is based on existing stories and histories, but a lot of the people who are consuming Namesake haven't necessarily done like a deep dive in the literature that we're using. So even when we're retelling it, it still seems really fresh and new to the people who are consuming the content. There's also a lot of visual symbology in Namesake. Like, Megan and me use a lot of, like, eyeballs and crowns and swords as, like, repeated pattern throughout the story. So sometimes I'll do a page where Megan's like, oh, okay, so in this page we probably should mention the King of Crowns. So I put like a skull and a crown in the background, and someone's like, hey, like they recognize the symbology as a recurrent like world building item. So even though we're not directly telling people like, okay, this part is about the King of Crowns, someone goes like, hey, look, I saw that. What are you trying to pull?
Well, and I also wouldn't call them shortcuts, though. I feel like what you and Meg are doing with Namesake is kind of just like continuing the tradition of like the epic storytelling and world building that that we all grew up with, and I think it's honestly amazing. Like, I think everybody on this chat has we each have a different approach to world building in our stories, and it's so great to see it. Like, I love it.
I know, that's why I picked all these people. I want to see us butt heads when we get to the nope section.
So I want to say though, Isa and I are an interesting team because Isa is very much our ideas person. Don't get me wrong. She is the one who came up with our overall symbols like the King of Crowns and stuff like that, the colors and the motifs. That is all her. I'm very much our details person. I love research. When we started Namesake, I got every single biography of Baum, of Charles Dodgson, aka Lewis Carroll, of James Barrie, of all the people involved. I sat and read the books, and so I think that works in Namesake because we have that mesh of the overall ideas person and the really key detail person.
I think
I totally agree.
Yeah, I think this sort of like flows into my next point too. And Diana mentioning that Tolkien was like a big favorite of hers too. I feel like there's sort of this loss because a lot of people, when they think like big world building, they think about Tolkien immediately because he's the easiest example to go like this fucking guy that makes up a language. But I feel like the difference between a lot of people trying to imitate Tolkien and Tolkien himself is that Tolkien's world building can be like lifted from the story, and a lot of the stories remain intact. Like Lord of the Rings, you follow Frodo through his quest, and all you need to know is kind of like ring bad, Sauron worse, and you can still sort of follow the story. You don't have to like read the Similarian in any shape or form. And
He did it because he just wanted to, really.
Yeah, you did it because it was fun. And I feel like a lot of imitators,
They don't get that part.
they don't get
They
that
feel like
part.
they have to.
You have to, and a lot of the dialogue makes it impossible to not know the story. Like this is like the biggest nope for me. I hate when a comic starts off explaining the history of the world. Like, because first of all, I don't know anybody yet. I'm not gonna care yet. Like, I don't give a shit. I'm sorry.
Where are the future friends? Bring them.
Yeah, bring the friends first. But also, it's like you're throwing all this stuff at me that I have to remember, because it's basically saying like 4 gods long ago, blah blah blah, and then they farted out a sword or something. Like, you're giving me all of this, and now I have to remember this because in 10 minutes from now, you're gonna have the 2 leads. They're gonna go like, "Hey Jeff, hey Bob. Remember when there was a war 15 years ago with the 5 gods?" And Bob's gonna be like,
names like Jeff and Bob.
then Bob's like,
I mean,
absolutely.
It's not like in comics, but I love the opening to Avatar: The Last Airbender because it summarizes the story in like 15 seconds. And if you've
That's all you need.
That's
all you need.
You know what world you're entering and you know what's happening.
But the difference between someone just info dumping before you meet the characters and the opening of Avatar is that the opening of Avatar is literally all you need. It's essentially the Frodo good, ring bad, basically. Like, that's why it works. And it's not like if you skip the opening,
You'll still get it.
you'll still get it. Like, it's not necessary. It lifts right out of there. It's short and it's direct. The Fire Nation attack. Because that's what's fun about it too, is that I feel like when you have like a this little introduction that introduces the world, because the difference between someone who's like 5 gods long ago farted out a sword and Avatar: The Last Airbender is that Avatar: The Last Airbender, that's just like flavor. It just like Megan says, real fast, it sort of puts you in the story, but the actual story is way more complex, and the Fire Nation is not completely made of the enemy. And a lot of the story in the episodes is about how they're not the enemy, but then, in Zelda, you have to know that the Triforce is from the 3 gods, because in every game you get at some point where they're like, oh yes, remember that one god? Anyway, their Triforce is the wisdom one, and that's the one you have. And it's like, bitch, what? Like, I just wanted to climb some monsters.
One example, though, from Namesake, that it was an early world-building decision by the 2 of us that I really liked, is how we basically summarized Ya's books through the eyes of Ginger, which basically turned it into a whole girl power insulting Warwick thing.
Yeah, she was just making a speech of like, remember when we kicked ass? Let's kick ass again! Like, it's just fun.
Yeah,
You go, Diana.
Oh, no. Yeah, I was in the same boat. Like, I personally agree too. I'm not a huge fan of like info dumps at the beginning. Like, I really think it just slows down the story. And like you said, like, nobody really cares at the end of the day. We just want to get with like the main characters, like journeys and stuff. But over the years, I've realized that like, a lot of people, like audiences, they're so forgiving. They'll take anything as long as it's like interesting enough. So like, while I don't like it, I certainly know that it works for a lot of people. So then I'm just like, I don't know what a nope is.
I think it also works depending on the context. Like, this info dump at the beginning works if you're doing like a game. Because,
I think something we definitely need to acknowledge is the difference in mediums. Like, the 15-second intro works for Avatar because it's 15 seconds. That is a measurable thing of time. But in a comic, that would be maybe several pages, or like something that you interact with in a game. I think there's totally a different like criteria.
Like,
I totally agree.
Yeah, in a game they have to do, like, I feel a lot of people who use that intro info dump, they kind of copy it because they copy it from like other mediums that they like games or whatnot. But you kind of need it in a game because that's not the point of the media you're using. Like, the point is to give you vague context.
Something to whack.
Yeah, so you can get to the smashing. That's what you're here for. So it's flavor in that context, because that's not the execution. But if you're doing a novel or a comic, then it sort of ruins the execution, because like I think it's Diana that said that it puts a stopper at the beginning. But in a game,
I'm actually a lot more forgiving of lore and info dumps in novels than I am in comics. I feel like you can totally get away with it more in a novel.
Why so?
I totally agree with that. Yeah.
I think it's because, for one, you get through it a lot quicker than in a comic, because in a comic, for one, you have so many pages that you also have to draw, but as a reader, you expect comics to move quicker, but in novels, you kind of don't.
Yeah, I think I agree with that, just because since like a novel is asking for more engagement from a reader than a comic would, because comics will provide like a visual medium for you to like, and that's another way.
Yeah, the visual aspect is also very important. With novels, you don't have that. You kind of have to spoon feed the information. You can't just show.
Yeah, basically.
What do you guys think of someone like doing it, but fully just through like vague descriptions, like not even through the character point of view at all?
Do you mean like, we're still talking novels, do you mean like third person, like that kind of thing?
No, not even like, you know how we're using the Avatar example. The Avatar one is fully through Aang's point of view. It talks about Aang. It's the voice is his past incarnation, the one right before him, who is his mentor. Like it's really angled in Aang, but then you have other books where it's like third person and it's not even touching the characters at all. It's a preamble.
You mean
I think
Avatar?
you touched on them.
I thought it was Katara that does the intro in Avatar. Are we talking about something else?
Wait, is it Katara?
Yeah.
It is Katara. Oh yeah, sorry. So it's definitely even more related to Aang, because you know his girlfriend's doing the it's doing the intro.
Yeah, we're not getting like a actual history of how the Fire Nation swept through the Earth Kingdom or whatever. We're just getting, they did this. Bye.
They did this, let's go.
Time to quest.
He's gone. Now he's back.
I guess what thing, when you read books, what aspect of a world do you personally not like? Like, if someone puts this in their world, you're like, why? Why would you do
Well,
this?
I don't notice this in novels, but I do notice this in comics in particular, that I will say is my personal nope. And again, like anything I say is like totally personal. I don't think this is like I don't think there's rules for at all. Yeah, it's a safe space. But basically, I don't like it when there is key information being delivered by like dialogue that isn't driven by the main character. So like, let's say it's like a character walking through like a busy area, and then you see in like the background people whispering about like a murder happening or something. Like I think that is a little, for some reason it doesn't really dive well for me, because especially if like the main character is not privy to it or is not paying attention, but we're supposed to pay attention to it, I'm just like, okay, then like let the character remark on the fact that there's a murder happening. Why don't they care? Why do we need to know? And like, I don't know, I noticed that like sort of thing happening in comics a lot, that kind of drives me up the wall.
Like, it's
I think
a bit
I can
passive.
agree with that.
Yeah, it's a bit passive. It's like, oh, I just happened to walk by this really important. It's kind of like when characters turn on the radio and the first thing that plays is like a murder escaped in your area.
Yes, exactly.
Like lucky, tune in, you know. Good job, me. What about you, Misha? What's your biggest, like, every time you see this in a book, you're just like, ugh, no.
Ooh, I think my biggest nope has to do with scale. Mostly because there was a book I was reading that was like fantasy. It was years ago now, but I just remember feeling it was like they had their own like terminology for like seconds that was like this many worms passed, and I'm like, really? You couldn't just use the word seconds? But that's another thing. But I never got a good sense of like the scale of the place or like how far the characters had to travel, because it was just like so fast travel instantaneous that it just really rubbed me the wrong way. And especially if you have like a big old fantasy world and like a big city, and like it takes time to get to these places, and you're not like, if you can't just like magically transport, and it's like, oh, is the big temple like right next door to the palace? What are you talking about?
Yeah,
And
I do really hate when they change time things. I gotta say, like, I know if you have fantasy world, you don't, like, you're assuming that people are not going to use like November, December, January, but you know, you could just say 2 weeks later. You don't have to be like, oh yes, we are in the cycle of the Zorgate after their Zorgate, and you're like, huh?
Mercury's in retrograde.
Yeah, or at least use something that we can sort of like that we can sort of correlate to, like 5 moons ago. You're like, all right, so a month. Like something that you can translate, where they just make it up entirely and there's like a glossary at the end and you're just like, I'm not gonna flip through to read this. I'm just not. I'm gonna assume that a very long amount of time has passed, or not at all, and not care.
The only time a glossary has like well, the couple of times glossaries have really worked for me was in the Six of Crows duology, where like at the end they had a glossary of like all the different characters and like their relations and names, because there are a lot of characters in those books.
I think that's fair.
That's just a character guide, though. It's not
Yeah.
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 But,
that's good.
in London, which is a like a British book, at the end for English copies, there's like British slang and like different sorts of terminology that might not read to American readers. And that book has some of my favorite world building in it, and just like the scale, the inventiveness of like, this is a city made of the trash that kind of like melts through our world and grows organically in theirs. Like, I love that so much.
But yeah, you gotta make it relatable. I also hate that. It's because it's like you're trying to be clever, but nobody knows what the hell you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least be clever for real. Like, it's when they do it and they make up words. You're like, I have no idea. At least, like, make it, I don't know, metric. Like, it's always 10, 10, 10. That's a thing, too. Like, if you want to make time interesting and you want to change it and you want to make it relatable, then use, like, math that is understandable, like sets of 12 or 10. It's when you have books that are like, oh yeah, sets of 5. It's like, why? Why would you do this? Now we all
Clearly, they all just have 5 fingers.
Yeah, now we all have to become experts at counting.
How dare you put calculus in this book?
Ugh.
I think the only time I've run into where that kind of fantasy timekeeping and stuff worked was Discworld, because it was a joke and because it didn't really matter.
Well, the point of it was that books do this, so it's funny because...
Yeah, but sometimes they do it completely in earnest and it just doesn't work.
Yep. What about you, Corny? What's the thing that you see in every book and you're like, ugh?
Honestly, I don't read too many books, but the thing that bothers me in world building in general is often the way that information is conveyed, like the as you know problem, where characters will deliver information to people that already know that information, but it's for the sake of the reader. It just pulls me right out.
Yeah, I think that's why it's probably better to sort of keep to, like, having some kind of audience surrogate in a group. Because otherwise you get... Like, I actually liked how they did it on The Witcher. Because you had 2 episodes where it was just The Witcher, so nothing was explained. And at some point they introduced the Bard, and then stuff was being explained.
The Bird.
Oi Witcher. Sorry, I had to do that.
Sorry?
Sorry. I always just think Oi Witcher whenever I hear Witcher.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, at some point you need like a character that serves as the audience thing because like, and I really liked how they did it for that because the first 2 episodes your time is weird because
time is weird in the whole thing, really.
Yeah, because they have
so confusing.
They have free converging storylines, but at some point you catch on, but you only start catching on when they introduce the audience surrogate character, which is the bard, whose name I forget now.
Jaskier?
Yeah, Jaskier.
Yeah.
And
to be honest, I really loved how they did it. I loved it.
I mean, I loved it too.
Yeah, Witcher was great.
I really liked it. Like, this is not a complaint, but I like how they started and they were like, you're confused at first because the storylines are not clear and you don't have an audience surrogate, and then they introduce Jaxier and it becomes clear and you're like, oh, I get it. Yeah, that's good. I'm into this now. Plus he's got a dope song. You know, you gotta respect the man.
Yeah, he's just cute.
He's a very good boy. Good lad.
See, I tried watching Witcher and I couldn't even get through the first episode because I was like, what happens? What's going on? But hearing you guys talk about this now, I might give it another shot.
Definitely get to episode 3 with Jaxier because that's when, again, the audience surrogate is there. If as soon as you get to the audience surrogate part, you still can't get into it, then maybe it's not for you. But I basically noticed everybody said, like, I couldn't get into it because the first 2 episodes were confusing. It's because they tried to do it where it's just, like, organic world building where they explain nothing. And then it's after that Jaxier is like, what about this? What about that? And, like, Geralt has to explain shit even though he doesn't want to.
You know, talking about this, like, has also brought up, like, you bring up an interesting thing because, like, speaking of Witcher, like, the reason why I loved it so much is I felt like it continued in, like, the tradition of the shows that I grew up with, like Xena and, like, Hercules. And I kind of wonder if... Yeah, right?
I just realized that's exactly what it is.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Hell yeah. When I started watching it, I was like, Xena.
So, like, and that's kind of the interesting thing when it comes to, like, readers and their relationship with, like, genre and also just, like, world building and, like, what they are familiar with. Like, because I went into, like, The Witcher being like, yeah, this is exactly like Xena, I totally understood what I was trying to do. I was down for it the whole time. Whereas, like, I would totally understand why other people that wouldn't have that familiar background would just be completely turned off by it. And, you know, I can see this with so many other ways of, like, world building, like how people may respond badly to a Tolkien-esque, like, world building point of view, but they probably would respond well to more character-based, like, world building thing. I don't know, it's just interesting.
I feel like stuff like Xena and Hercules kind of works a bit on the same kind of world building as we use for Namesake, where it's very referential. Like, Xena definitely has, like, because it's like a Monster of the Week story, there's a easy storyline you can follow, but every time there's a new character, it's like a god or like an actual Greek character that they changed a lot. Obviously, it's not like always directly the god. And sometimes they change in the show itself. Like, my favorite thing is, like, Hades and Xena started off scary, and then the Disney Hades came out and he became like a used car salesman style character. Like, he was highly influenced by James Woods immediately.
Yes.
But I feel like it's that whole, like, building a story that's got, like, a referential base that if you know it, you're like, oh yeah, it's this character from this myth. And you can be like, ooh, that doesn't end well. This episode is probably not going to go super good. But if you don't know that, you can still follow. Like, it's interesting. It's sort of the same thing with Witcher because it's got a lot of referential stuff to, like, sort of mythology and this idea of, like, you know, he's a monster killer. So there's a lot of, like, compounded, like, history from past works that sort of influences the way you view it. And the Witcher books themselves, I don't know if you've read them, but they're actually all fairy tales based stuff. Like, that girl on the first Witcher episode, I can't remember her name.
Yennefer?
Sorry?
Oh, that's her name.
Which girl? There's several women.
The one that he bangs and then he kills.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, because in the book she's like a Beauty and the Beast character.
Oh, right, her.
Yeah, So it's really they removed that completely from the TV show. And from the games also, like, I think they just removed that completely. But the original books have a lot of, like, fairy tale nods. So the original books themselves have that whole referential world building, which is interesting if you're into that.
No, right. And it's interesting just to think that, like, we're all basically, that's what we're all doing. Like, we feel like we're all just inventing something new. But, you know, in actuality, we're, like, continuing this long tradition of storytelling, and we're just choosing, I guess, our own faction in some way. Like, Taylor, I know for Never Satisfied, like, your comic is gorgeous. And, like, you just kind of start off each chapter with, like, oh, yes, of course. You start off each chapter with, just like that beautiful spread, and then like the square around it, and you just highlight like a particular moment in time. And like I really feel like that sets the tone for world building as well, in particular with comics.
Thanks.
I was wondering, Megan, do you want to also chime in with like the thing that you hate the most in world building when you see it?
Lack of consistency. Don't change your mind. Just arbitrarily change your mind. I hate reading in stories where they introduce one concept and then all of a sudden, same concept has just randomly changed for no reason. And the other thing is when they kind of half-ass changing stuff. Like if you want to come up with an otherworldly name for like a sofa, just go all the way. Don't say sofa carpal tunnel. Just call it carpal tunnel. We're going to know it's a sofa. It's you don't want to over-explain things, and you definitely want to maintain consistency.
You basically don't like people who don't commit.
Yes.
Like, commit, damn it. I'm into this. Make me, like, either I'm committed to reading this, so you should be committed to writing this kind of deal.
Yes. It's kind of like, get an editor, get somebody to read behind you, get somebody to check your details. I know it's hard working alone, especially when you are handling art and writing and every single thing about your comic. But keep a notebook or something for the concepts you've invented and for the magic you've invented and currency and things like that. And do your absolute best to remain consistent. Just don't be one day like, oh, I'm tired of this. I'm just going to randomly call it purple now, when up to 33 chapters up to that point, it's been green.
I'm so guilty of this. But this is also partially why I don't go in very hard on world building, because you can get away with it if you don't commit. Basically, my philosophy is that if it hasn't happened in the story, it's fine to change it. Like, I could not tell you guys how many times Lucy's backstory has changed since I started the comic.
But then you're still consistent because you haven't shown it yet.
I know, but in the back is where I'm bad. I'm terrible.
And that's fine. Like in Namesake, we have changed the backstories of pretty much everybody since the start of the comic.
Yeah, we did that.
Once you have committed to the page, you do need to adhere to that. Like when we were doing printing, we were reprinting book 1. We had to actually go back and fix some of Jack's very early scenes, so they were consistent with the backstory we revealed in book 4.
Oh wait, I totally didn't realize that there was a discrepancy in Jack's storyline that way. Because I've been reading Namesake for a long time, so for me, like the reveal that he had like this really traumatic past where he lost his beautiful giant wife, now I want to go back and read the pages and see what you guys changed.
Well, to be fair, his background that he lost his wife was always kind of there, but the wife changed. At first, it was a different character. In the first version of Namesake, his wife was actually Wendy, and then Wendy became a character.
One thing that did make it to the page, though, at first, is the implication where Bird implies that Jack and Alice slept together. Well, we now know of Alice that would have never happened, and so we had to go fix that.
Yeah, just erase past sins. I even think, honestly, I'm not even sure that we intended that originally. I think it was actually even a typo, to be honest.
No, we intended it originally. I remember.
All right. I don't. It didn't feel very solid to me. So I'm like, sometimes I'm like, wait, was that actually just a mistake?
I'm
Yeah,
shot
to be honest,
first,
I feel-
okay?
Um.
Awesome. I killed the whole cat. Have a good afternoon, everybody.
I think another point that could be interesting to tell, I think, with world building, and that comes up a lot, which shows are very popular, like the infamous Game of Thrones, but sort of like world building that builds on gender roles a lot. Like, yeah, I agree, but we have to elaborate on why. But sort of like
Yeah, I'm not a fan.
yeah, nobody is, but we kind of have to explain why it's bad. Sort of this idea of like, for works like, I think it sort of works a little bit for works like Game of Thrones because it is based on, he's basically just copying the War of Roses, but you know, he's also adding some stuff that could be removed. So let's talk about
dragons.
Like dragons. So let's talk about that, like gendered roles in world building and people going like, oh, if you change those, it's unrealistic. Like
I think we could expand it to general like societal prejudices.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So anything that's like prejudice and intolerance and social positions and classism, people saying that if you don't include that in your world building, you're basically being unrealistic because that's what the real world is like. Like thoughts on that and, you know, what elements of it are relevant in certain types of storyline and stuff like that.
My thoughts are they're wrong. I generally prefer, if you're going to tell a story in a fantasy world involving these things, the story has to either be about these things or very tightly, like, involved with those things. Otherwise, you are just repeating problems that you don't need to.
Yeah,
it's
like,
a fantasy.
Yeah, like not to bring back The Witcher again, but a lot of people were complaining about how in The Witcher they had a lot of actors of color all over the place, which I thought was great. But a lot of people complained that it was like, oh, it's not realistic. But a lot of the prejudice in The Witcher itself was directed towards magic. Like, people accepted normal and then magic was bad. So they didn't like The Witcher and they didn't like elves and stuff like that. So I thought that was an interesting way to sort of change how it's angled. I thought that was fun.
Yeah, I liked that in The Witcher too.
Like, it still talks
And I like world building where there are prejudices based on like abilities people have, but I think you have to really commit to that kind of thing. Like, I think I've talked about before, probably on Twitter, how if you're going to do a story where people are oppressed or prejudiced against based on something, like based on them being actually dangerous, you have to really commit to unpacking that in the story, because otherwise you're just justifying illogical fears in real life. You know what I mean?
Sort of like when people use robots as a metaphor, like when people are like, oh, using robots as a metaphor for like dehumanizing.
I mean, like comparing X-Men mutants being discriminated against, like they can shoot fire out of their hands. That's a reasonable discrimination. And comparing that to real world discrimination, I think is kind of disingenuous.
Yeah.
So you have to really like commit to pulling the guts out of that concept.
What about?
I think it's always a tricky subject. Whenever I do see racism allegories in fantasy, it always makes me a little, because especially most of the time it is from white creators that are trying to, like, especially and I've seen this a lot, and as a fan of fantasy and like world building, it's always disappointing to see when you see like this fair-skinned race that is suddenly a part of, you see them go through discrimination and then they cut to like a panel of like people of various like backgrounds and skin colors, and I'm just like, okay. I'm like, it's not that it's bad, I don't know, it just makes me side-eye a bit. And
it's definitely awkward,
Yeah, definitely.
I can
Yeah, I'm unfortunately at the point in my life as a consumer and reader that I can't help but look at the creator's background and then see what they're trying to do in their work and just be like, okay, why are they doing this? Like, why? I don't know. And it feels bad because I don't want, I do want art to like exist on its own. I want it to stand on its own merits, but I don't know. It's a little complicated.
I mean, no art exists in a vacuum, so I don't think we really can look at anything as standing on its own.
Yeah, totally agreed. It's just weird.
It's definitely super awkward. I think a lot about. So, you guys know the movie like Valeriant and the Thousand Planets?
No, I mean I heard of it, but I never saw it.
Yeah, well,
I don't know anybody that saw it.
Don't see it; it's bad. Sorry.
Yeah, same. I just disagree.
Yeah, it's just a shitty movie, but the first 10 minutes are good. Watch the first 10 minutes essentially because it's like a fully separate story. It's essentially Up. The first 10 minutes are like completely different. Essentially, that movie was based on a French comic that I love, which is also called Valeriant, and it's based on one specific issue of the comic where they have this giant structure, which is like the station, which is like in the movie, it's all like different aliens that decided to sort of hang out together and form this like multi-alien culture, multi-dimensional station. And in the book, what happens is that they have the people who started the cell in the book, the first station cell, are actually this really, really old race of aliens. And they sort of get wind that humans are trying to exact a plan where they're going to take over the station and sort of become like, they want to essentially like enslave a bunch of the alien races. The humans are the bad guys in this. And part of the story is about them kidnapping the human ambassador and Valeriant to bring them to the old alien cell and teach them like why this is a bad idea. So essentially like Grandpa Alien goes get young idiot to teach young idiot to not be an idiot. And the whole story is about the other character, the female lead, Laureline, trying to find them and bring them back. And then she meets the aliens and she's like, yeah, you should totally listen to these guys, you assholes. So that's the plot of the comic. The plot of the movie is completely different and actually does that thing that Diana mentioned where it's like the frail, pale alien race being, discriminated and exploited and, racism bad because of this. And I just thought it was really strange to see something use all the world building from the comic where it worked because the idea was that, the humans were going to exercise colonialism and be bad. And the fact that it was happening in that kind of setting was the point. And then the movie, by making the humans like, oh no, humans, they're good actually. They want to help the aliens. Like by changing that message completely just renders the setting and all the world building that Eoffer did for the comic like senseless. It was really strange to see because they really worked hard to make the station and the aliens exactly the same as the comic. So all that just falls really flat. So when I think about something that's like really intensely well done and that has world building, that has like racial allegory that's really well done, you really have to do it in that context of something that's really interesting and that it works like that. Because as soon as you change the message in that world, then the world sort of becomes stupid.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like it would have, like Taylor said, it would have to be a focus, and it's hard to commit to that. And at the end of the day, when I kind of think about my favorite stories that have really good world building, I don't remember it for those minute details. I remember it for the moments of like highs and lows that the characters experience. So I think that's why at the end of the day I do gravitate towards like storytelling or world building that is character focused, because that's all I remember from all my favorite stories.
The world building becomes like a beautiful woven coat that the character gets to wear, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is what we end up remembering anyway. If like all the fan fiction I read is, the common thread in all of it is that we love characters. We love how they interact in the world and how they survive in the world with all the different struggles and issues they go through. We don't remember it exactly for like in year 622, this and this happened and blah, 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 blah. Like we don't do that. We remember the character.
Yeah, nobody remembers the background in Judge Dredd. They just remember Judge Dredd.
Exactly.
It's so elaborate for no reason.
Yeah, my favorite example of that is the Polygon Unraveled, where Brian he reads every book in Skyrim and goes through the history ones and just reads out this like really dry history excerpt, and he's just like, "It's boring. Get out of here."
Did you see the one where he did it on Sonic too? That was really funny.
Yeah, Sonic is actually what I thought you were going to bring up.
The Sonic lore one is amazing.
The knitting circle.
Let Sonic knit. Let Sonic knit. One of us.
Things to include in the sequel. He knits now.
You know what? You bring up a good point. This shows that no one cares about world building because nobody knew that Sonic was from Nebraska. No one.
Nebraska.
Nobody knows when anyone's from Nebraska.
Home of Sonic.
Put that on their billboards.
I mean, it might actually help Nebraskan tourism.
There we go.
What do they have there?
I don't know. I have no idea.
Is there a mountain in Nebraska? Where is Nebraska?
Furiously Googling.
What's in Nebraska?
Smack in the middle.
Oh my god. That is a terrible place to be. Unless the water is rising, which apparently is extremely likely.
Yeah, like the more that we talk about it, the more I realize the best world building is the world building that isn't just like overt in a way. Like if it feels like full enough for you to be fully invested in the characters, then you did a good job. But if it's not full enough, or like if the characters aren't interesting enough, I don't know like what's more important at the end of the day. I guess it just depends.
I think it really...
I think the characters.
Yeah, the characters. Like, there's so many books.
Like, I'm not reading about a mountain.
Yeah.
Unless I am, I guess.
But that's like...
Unless the characters mountain.
That's very now, though. Like, there was a thing with European comics, and, like, also older fantasy, when you think about it, where, like, the characters kind of were like just audience avatars. They didn't really have that much personality. And a lot of European comics, back when I was a teenager and younger, like Spirou, Asterix, all that, like Asterix obviously has a personality. Like, that, I'm not saying that he's a blank slate, but the adventures of that world are often like, you have 46 pages for shit to happen. Now go. So there's not a lot of introspection, And I feel like more and more media has sort of walked towards the world building being extremely character focused, and in ways are really cute. Like, I really like that from Misha's comic here, and I'll get to Corny's comic too because I have a comment on that one too. Sorry, Taylor.
Either's fine.
Yeah,
I'm a man of many names.
How dare you? So in Misha's comic, there's a bit of a Hogwarts thing going on where the characters in the school they go to are sort of divided by this suit symbol, because it's Wonderland, so people have like card suits. And I think that's really cute, because if you're like a young reader, you sort of have that whole like, ooh, tag yourself, I'm a spade or something.
Oh yes, that's something we should totally sidebar to talk about, is the kind of world building specifically made for you to insert yourself into.
Yes.
That's my favorite.
Like Avatar, like
your
Harry
comic,
Potter.
the familiars, just like
Like mine!
Yeah, familiars, and just everybody
Like Homestuck.
working. Homestuck, yes! Just like this world building that can be extremely complex, but boils down to like this, like, I'm a Hufflepuff, you know? Like, there's a whole history behind it, and I'm not gonna say it doesn't matter, because people who read the books know that it does, because at some point Harry has to have a huge history lesson so he can find a goddamn crown.
A diadem.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I never even read that book. I just know that for some reason.
Movies?
Nope.
Oh.
Never got that far.
Wait, was it a diadem in the movies, or did they change that? God,
I don't
who knows?
know.
I haven't watched the movies at all.
No, I stopped.
I think I got to 5, and then I was like, welp. But
What
yeah,
were you saying?
world building that is basically, especially oriented towards young readers, that is made to help them feel integrated.
Yeah, like categorization.
Yeah,
exactly. That was those were genres I always loved, like growing up, because a lot of my like art growth as a youngin, and still to this day, is like self-insert stuff. So
Yes.
I love worlds where you can just like immediately see like, oh, I would be this person, I would live this kind of life, this rules, let's go.
Nisha, I'm shaking your hand.
I totally agree.
Same hat.
Same hat.
but even like without it necessarily being a classification, I think there's a lot of that, especially in young works. Like, I'm thinking about Shira and all the princesses, because it'd be so easy to make like a princess OC, you know? Like, if I was 8 and watching Shira, I could be like, I'm the princess of fire. Like, I would absolutely do that. That's 8-year-old me.
Hell yeah.
That's the good stuff.
It's super nice. Yeah, Princess Sona, someone in the chat just for that. Or like witch Sonas, or all that stuff that people do on Twitter. It's just this fun little piece of world building that just, it's like a door. It invites you in. It invites you to be part of it. I think
Exactly.
Yeah, people are commenting in the chat like My Little Pony, Sailor Moon. Yeah, all that stuff. Yeah, Sailor Moon, they didn't have that in the anime. Well, they did towards the end. But in Sailor Moon, like, all planets had sailors, so you can make Sailor Moon OCs. And on the internet,
1,000 Sailor Earths.
Oh god,
Everybody had one.
So many. And like in the dark ages of the internet, everybody had a goddamn Sailor Moon OC. Like, I had one. Everybody did. It's insane. That's the good stuff. Spider Sonas, yeah, that was really recent after
Spider Sonas.
I love doing Spider Sonas.
It was right after Into the Spider-Verse, which is a great movie. That also is constructed on almost entirely referential world building, which I love. I could do like a whole class on Spider-Verse. Like, please.
Yeah. When I was first watching the movie and he said the line at the end of like, you can wear the mask, I was like, oh, self-insert, I'm here.
It's time. Or like mermaid stories, Dungeons and Dragons. Like, there's so much world that, especially in stories oriented to young people, or like young at heart, I suppose. That's me. There's this idea of like being able to create a character and integrate yourself to the world. Or in the cases of like stories told in the modern setting, like in a school, just this idea of like you could be these characters. I find, I don't know, there's something about it that's just so utterly charming, and that really is sort of knitted in this idea of creating like character world building. I know, I just love it.
Yeah, I think that also ties really well into what we were talking about earlier with like being able to connect with the characters on an emotional level before dropping the big ass backstory, where it's like, if you have an emotional connection with the world and with these characters and you like them or you're invested in them, then the world just becomes like something that you want to be a part of and something you want to like see more of, because you're viewing it through the eyes of someone that you like and you want to see more of and you want to see them grow along with this world.
I guess the biggest nope of something like this is, and I've seen this, when you see like a work, especially oriented towards like children, that does it, but in this very cynical way. Like, they're not really trying to have fun, they're just doing it because it sells kind of deal.
Oh, that's the worst.
And like you can always kind of tell when it's not sincere. Like there's a weird plasticity to it, like a weird faux amusement.
Can you give an example?
Oh, I had one a couple days ago, but now I can't think about it at all. Yep, it's gone.
We'll never know.
It.
Well, I'm gonna remember later, and then I'm gonna like tweet about it or something. But
so it's like stuff where they put these categories and type stuff in there just to cash in.
Yeah, someone gave a good example. Someone in the chat is like, you can say Divergent if you want.
Unfortunately, I don't know enough about Divergent.
I mean, it's kind of true.
I unfortunately know too much about Divergent.
It's like the same stuff of like the factions and whatnot, and like girl from service faction becomes warrior faction.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's the worst thing.
It was so bad that like they didn't even make the second part of the finale. It just flopped that bad.
Yeah. Divergent is basically, like if you turn classism into Disneyland.
Wasn't that also in the Hunger Games, which I also did not read or watch?
Yeah, but the difference is the Hunger Games point is that it's actually shitty to do that.
Yeah, the Hunger
Games. Divergent say it was good?
Divergent says nothing. It says it has no opinions.
Just as bad.
The Hunger Games, like the books, were actually good and dived more into like the classism and like PTSD and war and stuff. And the movies, they just really gloss over all that.
Yeah. I have heard that.
The point of the Hunger Games books is like, what I think is the best about it is that the ending is kind of bad. I'm not going to spoil anybody, but like the ending is essentially the ending you would expect for someone who survived so much, It's not it's not like we're all good now, whereas Divergent is like, yay, I reverse society and I get to bang this guy. You're like, cool.
She dies in the end of Divergent though. Oh, spoilers.
I'm not gonna spoil Misha. I am.
Yeah, I mean before that, Misha, but sure. Spoilers for Divergent, everybody. But before,
years old by now.
Yeah, but before she dies in like this epic sacrifice, there is that whole like, I have been sublimated kind of mood that I'm like, what the fuck? Book? Don't like this.
The problem with Divergent was the fact that it divided society on not even personality traits, but just like different. I can't even say because it was just like the people that were selfless, warrior, and then I guess hippies, and then government narc. And it was just
just like Harry Potter.
It was basically split on like
Potter, because like I don't know, there's something about it that makes it just completely fails on so many different regards. Because like at least Hunger Games, it's about class, right? It's about how capitalism bad and like not
and like it's something that you're born into and that you have to actively fight to break out of. In Divergent, it's like, you're 16, pick a thing.
Yeah, in Hunger Games, you're born in a district, and, like, sucks to be you if it's, like, one of the lower ones. But in Divergent, you have to pick. And, like, Divergent bugged me because it felt like it was, like, congratulations, you're 16 now, so we're gonna decide where to put you based on, like, the job listing. Because the way they describe the jobs kind of sounds like, when you apply to a job and they describe the job in a way that's, like, too weird. Like they're like, we're looking for super motivated, influential people. Like
that's exactly it.
Yeah, fuck you. Like, no, don't do that. Like it's terrible. It's just.
I also thought it was so funny that like, oh my god, and now there's the faction list, and then you see that they're just like, simply homeless people, I guess, and you're just like, wait, what are you trying to say? what is this world? What are you trying to say with this whole thing aside from that you lifted the entire story from Hunger Games? Like, it was so bizarre.
Yeah, it's
it
so...
blows my mind that it exists.
I was actually watching it, and you know what movie it reminded me of so much? Ghostbusters. You know how Ghostbusters is all about profit and like Reaganism and all that, and I was watching Divergent, and then I read the book, and I was like, this is fucking Reaganism. What the hell? Why is this here? This is like a teen book. It's so bizarre. Or like another one that's really shitty is like Uglies.
I never heard of that.
I've heard of it, but I'd never read it.
It's God, it's essentially people live in a society where like image is everything. So when you become 16, you can start buying your image. It's essentially it's a similar storyline to the very good webcomic Always Human by Ari North, where in Always Human, it's on Webtoons if anybody wants to read that. That people can like essentially modify their image digitally, and the story around Always Human is that a person cannot purchase image stuff because all these additional digital like extensions to her body, she doesn't have a body who can take it. So the story is about this person who's extremely ordinary because they have like a physical inability to integrate this, falling in love with someone who is addicted to these changes. So it's like an interesting storyline for that. But then
that sounds great. I want to read it.
Yeah, it's good. It's really good. It's like a cute romance. So it's like a really interesting social message, but wrapped up in adorableness. So it's great. But then you have Uglies, that's like the same idea, where you have a society where everybody can change their image. So they immediately starify it, and like the hero is all like, I'm gonna be really beautiful, but also I'm gonna be like not like other girls. And it's just like, oh, like just 5, what? No, stop. Like there's 6 books of this. There's so fucking many. And I've read all of them because I am trash. Please do not judge me. And you know, I finished it and I was like, well, like it had no impact on me except that it made me feel bad about everything always. And it's like, it's such a weird book because it's all about image, but also spends so much time trying to set up that like, ooh, but the characters are like really nice. Like she's good. Like she falls for this, but also she's still super good and super smart. We promise. It's like, book, don't tell me, show me. Like it's a bizarre, but yeah, when I think about stuff like Divergent, I immediately think about Uglies too. So those are some pretty good bad examples. Good bad examples.
My favorite like good bad YA example, like just going into the YA book section and reading the back blurbs, is one where it's like, when you turn 16, you get matched with your soulmate. And now this girl, she broke the system because she has 2 soulmates that are both
I hate that.
And have short hair, but one is blonde and one is brunette.
I remember when they actually like played with that in The Good Place. Like they had an episode where they were like, Chidi, you have 2 soulmates now, and Chidi chooses immediately, and then they fuck with him for like an entire episode.
So funny. Oh, so good.
Good Place is the best, like,
world building.
Yeah, it's the
Just
best
the best,
Kant fan fiction
period.
I've ever read. It's amazing. Watch The Good Place. So good. I think we're basically a bit over time, but we started a bit late, so we can sort of finish. But someone is actually mentioning Margaret Atwood in the chat, and I actually think that's like maybe an interesting topic to sort of like dissect as like a last little world building thing, because I don't know if anybody here is familiar with The Handmaid's Tale, but it was like a very short book at first, and then it became like a sprawling TV series that has a huge amount of world building. And the book is fully focused on the character, her limited information, and her just trying to hold on to her personhood. So a lot of the book writing is about like her feelings and her doing things to essentially feel her body and take place in her body, like the sunlight on her arm or the food in her mouth or stuff like that, which makes her a very slow-paced book. But then the TV series is all about like rah revolution, so it's like a really interesting sort of divergent storytelling, which I guess sort of dives into like adaptation and how they adapt the world. Do you guys feel that when you adapt the world and you try to sort of like focus the adapted story on the world more than the characters, do you think that's like a loss or a good thing?
I think it's way too case by case to really give a hard answer one way or another, because you can do it really well, you can do it really bad. And I don't know anything about The Handmaid's Tale to comment on that one specifically.
Yeah, I'm not super familiar with The Handmaid's Tale, but I know for adapting a book like fairy tales or Alice specifically, like there is a lot of focus on well, there's not a whole lot of focus on the world as a whole. It's pretty much just like she fell down a rabbit hole and now there's a forest, maybe a garden, whatever.
Now it's crazy.
Yeah, but just like but trying to take the spirit of it, where it's just like there's all these weird things and it's magic. Don't explain anything. Let's go. But doing like the bare minimum of explaining the suits and like the people's place in this world, but then the rest is just like it's magic. Yay! Like being able to being able to do as much as it affects the character, that's I don't want to say it's a good rule of thumb, or there's not really any strict rules in world building because it's such a case by case thing, and especially in adaptations. But again, it does all go back to like characters and emotional pinpoints.
Yeah, and I think like I don't know anything about The Handmaid's Tale, but thinking about adaptations, I think like the best one I've seen recently was The Invisible Man. Like basic
I want to
reboot.
see that so bad. And
So
surprisingly,
the horror movie one?
yeah.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, it's the same actress as The Handmaid's Tale. She's really nailing that typecasting of girl who is terrified and then terrifying.
Yes. So yeah, but what I love about that in particular is that yes, for me, I think the best adaptation is transformation of the original content, but still kind of keeping true to its roots. It's not necessarily having to do with like keeping the same story points, right? Like that's not important. What's more important is keeping the feel and but still making it interesting. And just FYI, if anyone hasn't watched it yet, please watch The Invisible Man. It's great. It's just like a great case study of gaslighting, just completely heightened. And I recommend it.
Give it your money.
See, I was kind of instantly uninterested in it because the trailer basically was the movie, from what I could tell.
It did not. I promise you, the trailer shows nothing of like what actually happened. It takes so many crazy turns that is really interesting, and there, like I'm at the point where I can kind of tell like what happens in a film just straight from the get-go, but there's something that happens in the middle of the film where it just completely caught me off guard, and I was just like, they did a great job. They really did.
Maybe when it comes out.
That's my favorite in going to movies, like as, you know, writers and like people that really do like write and analyze stories, is going into movies and being like, oh, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. Like for that new Scooby-Doo trailer that's going everywhere where he gives him the collar and it's like, I'll never take it off. I just turn to my friend and go, he's going to take it off.
Bitch is going to go free. Immediately without a beat. That's happening. Yeah, that's the bad part of writing, is that if something is like kind of basic or not good, you see it coming really fast. That's why I really liked or sometimes you just watch a movie where you can see it coming, but it's good. Like I watched Parasite and I could guess most of what was going to happen in the movie, but still I was like, man, oh man, what the hell? Like it's the
Parasite was so good.
I actually had to like get up and walk around because it was so goddamn tense.
Yeah, like you can tell that they're gonna get caught, and you can tell that what's his face at some point is gonna go like a little axe crazy, but you don't care because the performance is absolutely insane.
Wait, Issa, you guessed that there was two people hiding in a bunker underneath the underneath the house?
I guess pretty
Spoilers.
quickly that the
Oh yeah, spoiler.
I have not seen this.
yeah, basically I guess
Oh.
without spoiling, I guess that the person who was taking care of the house had like a secret pretty quickly, and eventually that it was person based. So not so much that hiding people, but yeah, I could see some shit coming more than I thought I would, but I feel that just means that he's really good at setting up stuff. It's the same with Snowpiercer. Like, you can see some stuff coming, kinda, but the execution absolutely blows your mind, so...
Yeah, and I think that's another really important key to like world building as well, is like knowing your audience and just like not treating them like they're stupid. I really don't like comics or books or movies that makes the audience like holds the audience's hand. It's like the audience is pretty smart nowadays. Like, and if you respect your audience and just take that into account that they're smart and you should treat them with more respect in the writing in terms of how you divulge information, it's just going to be a better product overall. And that's why I really loved The Invisible.
So good. I want to see it so bad. Someone, please. Well, I can't go until this quarantine stuff is over, but I hope to see it today.
Yeah.
I think that's it for time. So we ran a bit long, but I think it was really interesting. So, general reminder to everybody in the chat, this is our last stream for this weekend. Oh, but Hiveworks will be doing way more streams. We're planning on doing this regular thing on like a weekly or monthly basis. So if you have topics you're interested in or artists that you would like to hear from, definitely tweet at us for like, oh yeah, do more of this, or like, I'd like to see this creator again. For sure, like anything you want to toss at us, we are always looking for feedback. Reminder again that we are currently having a sale. It should be finishing pretty soon because it was a sale.
Buy my book.
Yeah, and also back Alice in the Nightmare on Kickstarter, and
Buy her book.
Buy her
Woo,
book.
yes, please.
Also,
it's good, I promise.
You can buy Taylor's book on our store with the discount, Spring 2020. So Never Satisfied Book 1. You can also purchase that. It's very good. Look forward to Diana's rebooted Lonely Vincent Billigram. It's gonna kick butt. I'm super excited for that. And also read Namesake by me and Megan.
Yes, please.
It's
Buy
fun.
their books.
And also
We
you
have
can
good books.
Yeah,
Come see our wares.
you can
Their
purchase
books
the
about
books and
books.
we've got pretty solid world building apparently, so that's fun. Thank you so much for tuning in, and as soon as we have dates for future streams, we will post those on Twitter, so definitely follow us, and follow us on Twitch for basically notifications about that. So thank you very much, and have a great end of your weekend.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Stay with you guys.